Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, reporting from just outside the Palace of Westminster in central London, where global power, policy and markets intersect. Coming up on today's show, Britain has a new Prime Minister in waiting. Sir Keir Starmer has resigned. Andy Burnham is heading to Downing Street. What does it mean for Britain and for the millions of Nigerians and Africans who call this country home? And 10 years since Britain voted to leave the European Union, 7 prime ministers in a decade, and an economy that experts say is between 4 and 10% smaller than it would have otherwise been. Has Brexit delivered what it promised? And from London's Climate Action Week, Lagos State's Special Advisor on Climate Change joins me, and S&P Global's Head of Upstream Energy on what the Iran peace deal means for African oil markets. Then later, after On the Ground, what is it actually delivering for African businesses? And Nigerian Women in Business, or WINBIZ, brings its London conference to the heart of the British capital. But first, just meters from where I'm standing, the history of British politics shifted once again this week. On Monday, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer stepped outside number 10 and confirmed he would resign as Labour leader and Prime Minister after losing the confidence of much of his parliamentary party. In his own words, the question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. I have heard the answer and I accept it with good grace. It brings to end one of the most turbulent premierships in modern British history. Less than 2 years after winning a landslide general election in 2024, Starmer was brought down by the collapse of his cabinet, catastrophic local election results in May, and Andy Burnham's decisive victory in the Makerfield by-election just 1 week ago. He will be Britain's 7th Prime Minister in a decade. Nominations for a new Labour leader open on the 9th of July and close by mid-July. A new leader will be in place before Parliament returns in September. Starmer will remain Prime Minister until that process is complete and has pledged an orderly handover. The question now dominating Westminster, and it is the only question that matters here, is not who will be Prime Minister, it is what Andy Burnham will do with power. Burnham is the overwhelming favourite. He is currently the only candidate in the race. Senior Minister Darren Jones confirmed on Wednesday he will not stand. Former Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who has been seen as Burnham's most likely rival, backed him within hours of Starmer's announcement. The only remaining uncertainty is former Armed Forces Minister Al Khan's, who has not ruled out a challenge, but would need the backing of 81 Labour MPs to trigger a formal contest, and that threshold appears beyond reach. There is, however, growing unease within the Labour Party. Some constituency members are pushing for a proper contest rather than what they described as a coronation, arguing that Burnham should be tested before he walks into Downing Street. The pressure on local MPs from their members is real. On policy, Burnham is expected to make a major speech next week, setting out his economic priorities, including confirmation that he will stick to Chancellor Rachel Reeves's rules for managing the public finances. Beyond that, many questions remain unanswered about what a Burnham government would look like in practice. For the Nigerian and African diaspora across British cities, this is not just a Westminster story. A new Prime Minister means a new government, new priorities and potentially a new approach to the UK-Africa relationship, to immigration policy and to the bilateral trade agenda that has been built so carefully over the past 2 years. Channel's Business Global will continue to follow this story closely. And this week also marks another extraordinary milestone in British history. On the 23rd of June 2016, exactly 10 years ago, Britain voted to leave the European Union. In a close referendum, 51.9% of Britons voted leave and 48.1% voted remain. What followed was a decade of political turmoil, economic disruption and national reckoning that continues to this day. Brexit continues to reduce the level of GDP compared to what it would otherwise be, diminishing government revenue and prompting tax hikes and spending cuts. This is according to Oxford Economics. According to a June 2026 YouGov poll, 57% of Britons now believe leaving the EU was the wrong decision. versus 30% who believe it was right. And the political cost has been just as stark. 7 prime ministers in 10 years, a revolving door of leadership that has left Britain's global standing diminished and its domestic politics increasingly fragmented. As one academic put it this week, Brexit fractured the European Union and broke British politics. For Nigeria and Africa, Brexit has reshaped the UK-Africa trade relationship, the immigration system, the visa rules and the bilateral commercial landscape. As Britain now prepares for yet another new Prime Minister, the question is whether a post-Brexit, post-Starmer Britain will find the stability it has been searching for since that fateful vote 10 years ago. Elsewhere this week, as London hosted its annual Climate Action Week, the city was itself baking in one of the most extreme heat waves ever recorded on European soil. A powerful heat dome settled over Western Europe, sending temperatures 14 to 18 degrees Celsius above normal. Spain and Portugal approached 45 degrees. France placed nearly half of its mainland apartments under a red alert. The United Kingdom broke its all-time June temperature record. At least 18 people have died. Scientists are unequivocal. Climate change is the driving force, making the extreme heat the new normal. Against that backdrop, London Climate Action Week brought together governments, businesses and investors to drive urgent action. I spoke with Titi Oshodi, Special Advisor in the Office of Climate Change and Circular Economy for Lagos State, a city of over 20 million people on the front line of rising seas, extreme heat and flooding. Her message from London this week was one Africa cannot afford to ignore.
You know, Lagos State has been building visibility. When we went to COP30, we went with a plethora of climate resilient pipeline projects because we understand the peculiarity of Lagos as a coastal city. So for 2026, we're beginning to move from climate ambition to implementation. We understand right now that capital mobilization is a fulcrum of how we want to be able to leapfrog into the next phase. So this time around, we have come with projects that are embedded within sustainable finance, investable projects that will give investor confidence. We're working with our local financial institutions to embed decarbonization tracking, to embed sustainable monitoring, to embed ESG compliance, and also get them to see that the patient nature, the patient loan, the patient financing nature of sustainable projects or climate-related projects are on the long term more profitable. And so the Climate Finance Preparedness Clinic is one of the vehicles that we're making quite a bit of noise about. We also have our 80 million clean cook stove, which is the mother of all clean energy projects addressing deforestation, circular economy, decarbonization, economic progression amongst women and children. And so because it's a clean development mechanism program, the green finance methodologies are also instituted in there, and that gives a lot of attraction to local financial institutions. We believe that if we're able to establish a strong financial base, we can then begin to attract the level of confidence and reduce attrition with the perceived risk that we usually suffer as an emerging economy. We have the goal, the national determined contribution goal as a sovereignty. What we have done is align towards that goal by distilling a state-determined contribution goal. So essentially we have set a target. We're working with the NCCC as well to ensure that our own pipeline projects are feeding into that sovereign plan for climate action and for carbon emission. We also achieved a signing of MOU with the Under 2 coalition, and that's essentially to help us to strengthen the partnerships, to deepen the level of climate literacy and advocacy, amongst our communities for climate action. Environmental sustainability can be achieved when we're able to tack on the economic propensity to it. And so we have achieved that. We have garnered a lot of interest and support from the Bloomberg philanthropies, from the C40s. There are quite a number of other funding institutions that we have also been able to connect with. So we're very, very optimistic, about the positioning for Lagos.
And from the climate emergency to the energy markets being reshaped by the Iran peace deal. The Strait of Hormuz is reopening. Oil prices have fallen sharply from their wartime highs. But for Africa, where the energy shock hit hard, from fuel shortages in Kenya and Ethiopia to squeezed public finances across the continent, the question is not just whether prices are falling, it is whether the investment case for African energy holds, what comes next for Nigeria's oil sector, and how the continent positions itself in a post-war energy landscape. Daniel Pratt is Senior Vice President and Global Head of Upstream Solutions at S&P Global Energy, one of the world's leading energy intelligence organizations, which recently opened a new office in Abuja.
I don't think it does change the long-term investment case. We see upstream capital spending increasing more than 40% in Africa by 2030. Our forecasts are based on long-term fundamentals, not short-term price fluctuations. And industry investment programs are also based on long-term fundamentals. So I think the investment case is still intact and actually might even be more compelling post the Middle East conflict. I think as operators reassess above ground risk globally, they might find Africa a relatively more attractive place to invest. What the data tells us is that many countries, not just in Africa, by the way, are highly exposed to single sources of supply. So whether that's oil or refined products, and in an era where energy security is top priority, I think countries are going to have to think long and hard on how they de-risk that exposure in the future, either through supply diversification and or increasing domestic supply and refining capabilities. Really excited about our new office in Abuja. Sub-Saharan Africa is going to see the largest population growth globally in the next 20, 30 years. And that places Africa in the center of energy markets. And of course, that challenge of providing energy access overall. So it's not just an indication of the importance of Nigeria, but I think the strategic importance of Africa more broadly. So we look forward to strengthening our relationships in the region in the years ahead. In many, many ways, infrastructure investment is the key to unlocking energy potential across Africa. And in terms of price, yes, they have come down from the highs that we've seen as a result of the conflict, but we still expect to see prices relatively high on a historical basis and levels that we think higher than we were forecasting kind of pre-war. So it will take some time for flows and production to return to pre-war levels, but we think that investment case, again, fundamentally long-term is still strong. I think the last few months have been a great test case, right? I think Dangote has been a great example of the strategic importance of investing in refining. Without Dangote, Nigeria would have been kind of scrambling for refined product supply. With it, it was not only able to avoid those shortages, but it also played an important role in supplying some of the short markets in Africa and actually Europe as well. It's important to understand that this is not an either or choice. It's not oil or gas or renewables. I think utilizing the resource and the technology that makes the most sense is critical. And I think given the push for energy access, affordability, we think hydrocarbons continue to play a critical role and probably a dominant role for many years to come. But we also believe the needs and conditions of each country are unique. And I think there's room for all resource development.
Still to come on Channel's Business Global, the AfCFTA in practice. What is it actually delivering for African businesses on the ground? I speak with Dorothy Tembo of the International Trade Centre and Nigerian Women in Business. WIMBIZ brings its London conference to the British capital. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, reporting from just outside the Palace of Westminster in central London, where global power, policy and markets intersect. Last week, I was in Geneva at Africa Collective, the flagship annual gathering bringing together governments, financiers and investors focused on Africa's economic future. It was the perfect setting for a conversation about the African Continental Free Trade Area. The AfCFTA connects 1.3 billion people across 55 African countries, yet intra-African trade accounts for just 16% of the continent's total trade. This is compared to 70% within Europe. ITC research puts the opportunity at an additional $22 billion in trade per year by 2029. The potential is clear. The question is whether it is being realised. Dorothy Tembo is Deputy Executive Director of the International Trade Centre, the joint agency of the WTO and the United Nations, and the architect of the One Trade Africa programme. I spoke with her in Geneva.
Absolutely. I see where you come from in posing that last bit. But I think our approach is not only to be in Switzerland, because first and foremost, that exposure has to be both ways. The Africans have to understand the demands of the market here. They also have to know who they potentially can work with and have these conversations. I know that these processes do not allow a broad-based representation of people to come all this way. But on the reverse, we also have created spaces for Europe to come to Africa. So this will be followed up by a Swiss business team being taken to Africa to do the same. So we continue to do this. But beyond this, within the context of the work that we do as an organization, we have many other spaces which we create, where we try to facilitate exposure from both sides. So that's one part of it. Why Switzerland? Why Switzerland? Why? Of course, Switzerland has a specific interest in Africa. As an entity, they have been able to provide support. They are already working, or they are already in processes which have seen collaboration working between Africa and Switzerland, and Europe even, on products such as chocolates, many other products that also have been. So we are more or less trying to build on that interest. I think the key here is to look more at an approach that brings to the table mutual interest to the two countries. So to the country and to the continent. And the continent, in the sense that, here is an opportunity for them to actually be able to come and invest in Africa. Why Africa? 1.4 billion people, with a framework that extends beyond perhaps some of the areas where they have touched as part of the Regional Integration Initiative. What is it I'm saying? Switzerland may already be accessing, for example, West Africa as an example, because of the cocoa relationship there. I know that there have been conversations within Africa with, for instance, COMESA or SADC, but what we are saying is here is a framework that offers you beyond and consolidates all these regional integration efforts that are being made into one continental offer, which is way above what has been offered as part of the regions. Because in terms of the conversations or the negotiations, what I had understood is that the Continental Free Trade Area is regional, or REX as we often refer to them, REX Plus. Because if it was equating to the same as what was being offered before, what would have been the value? So what we are saying here is here's an opportunity, but that opportunity will be optimized if you actually invest in Africa. And in so doing, that we are responding to the industrialization objective of the continent, that they know that now the relationship or the strategic partnerships are shifting into ones of mutual benefit, and that in doing all this, that we are also increasing the level of trade, increasing the level of incomes, increasing the jobs for many, many Africans across the continent.
And finally, this week in London, Nigerian women in business came together for one of the most powerful gatherings of the year. WIMBIZ, Women in Management, Business and Public Service, held its 4th London conference this week at 1 Great George Street in Westminster under the theme Meaningful Legacy, Power, Positioning and Influence in a Changing World. The conversation could not be more timely. The FTSE Women Leaders Review 2026 shows women now occupy 43% of FTSE 350 board positions in the UK, yet only 8% of those companies have female CEOs. Nigerian and African women are building businesses, leading institutions and driving economic growth on a global stage, while still navigating structures that were not built with them in mind. WIMBIZ has impacted over 344,000 women across more than 2 decades. Its London conference this week brought together leaders from the UK, Europe and Africa to ask the question that matters most. What does meaningful legacy actually look like, and who gets to build it?
WIMBIZ is giving you is what you probably don't have in your small circle. We're bringing from different parts of the world and helping you to fine tune to the environment that you're in. It's very important at this time. In a society where you viewed one gender as the protector, provider, the anchor of wealth generation has really hung on that person. But what WIMBIZ is saying is that it's hanging on the woman as well, because we're wearing those hats as well as many other hats. And our children need to, enjoy. They talk about the rate of mortality amongst men and women and what happens when the man goes and what happens to the women. Those things are mitigated already when the woman is in a place where she is the one holding and anchoring that wealth management system. So this is a very, very huge deal for us in this time where women are awakening to, like you said, roles. It's 8% now, but it's growing. It was less before. And so what legacy are you leaving? Is it going to be 8% after you leave again? No, it has to go generational, and that's really what it is. So
it's so important that women really, get the hang of leadership. We're doing it every day, and but we need the tools and resources to really hone in the skills, especially running our own businesses in organizational settings, etc. In terms of the delegates in the UK, what should they expect? Well, the theme this year, as has mentioned, we're talking about legacy. And one way to think of legacy is, what are the footprints that we're leaving, that we want to cement for generations to come? And different from what concepts have gone before, where it's at the end of one's career, you start thinking of legacy. No, it's what are the intentional steps that we should be thinking about as leaders right now, today, this minute, that we can put in place in building our organizations, building our communities, our families, to ensure that the values, the characteristics, the attributes that we're instilling in ourselves and those around us are there and will make an impact both now and beyond. So those are some of the things. When I think of my business school a few years ago, we were celebrated because in that particular set at Yale, we had a class that had about 40% women, and that was an MBA class, and it was so celebrated. So, imagine how much progress that could make if every board had at least that, and beyond. So there's still work to be done, but in doing that work, we still need to think consciously about the legacy, which is how well are we doing that work to make an impact, both now, but for generations to come.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.